What's up? You're watching Movies from Another World, and today we're going to be discussing John Carpenter's legendary film, and in my opinion, my favorite film of his, The Thing. And so we're just going to be talking about why we recommend it, why we love it so much. First of all, if you haven't seen the movie, just watch it. It's probably, I would say it's in my top 5 movies of like all time. So I would definitely say it's probably my biggest recommendation of anything that's going to be out this October. You know, we're making these videos about movies we recommend, and I think this is, without a doubt, the movie I would recommend the most of anything. And I don't know if that's true of you guys too.
No, Skullhead Face wins for me.
Okay, we're gonna have to cut that out. Spoiler.
But you didn't tell me I can't do that.
I mean, you can. I don't care. We can just leave all this in. Yeah. Anyway, like, would you not say, Trevor, like, it's probably the movie you recommend the most?
No, I hold it in extremely similar regard to you, where it's my favorite John Carpenter work, and I love all of the works that are regarded as classics. I don't have any dissenting opinions on that, it's in my top 10. Definitely my favorite horror movie, straight up horror movie, that is, for sure.
Yeah, with that being said, we're going to heavily spoil this movie. So, it's at this point like over 40 years old. So if you haven't seen it, there's no excuse. Watch it. We just really want to talk about it because I think we all have a lot to say about it. So
yeah,
that being said, we're just going to dive right in and start. So if there's any opening comments you want to make, I'll shoot over to you, Trevor.
Well, I mean, should we mention first that it's the basis for our new album?
No. We'll leave that out. Over to you, Trevor.
Yeah, I'd rather leave that out. The Thing, 1982. It's a very sort of initially simple idea when you describe it as a whole, although very innovative for the time. It's a movie with a lot of strengths. In fact, I would say it's one of those movies where once you try and describe what its strengths are, it's basically every single facet of it. The direction, writing, pacing, acting. It's really hard to pin down one particular thing that's good about it, in my opinion, even though a lot of times people try to. If I was to describe what's great about it, it's that it has an amazing pacing and everything about it works and is satisfying, and it's a great rewatch every time you see it.
Yeah, I to sort of go off of that, I would say the best thing that I sort of enjoy about it, like every time I rewatch it, and I could go on for quite a while about this, but I'll try to keep it, succinct, is the practical effects, because that's one of the biggest things that is going to make me instantly give your movie more of the benefit of the doubt, is if it's got compelling practical effects, it's going to be and this movie, in my opinion, is number 1 or number 2 in greatest practical effects movies of all time. There's one scene in particular, there's a couple of scenes, 2 or 3, but that for me is the thing that sets this above everything else, is that the story is great, the acting, all that stuff is obviously amazing, but the practical effects, in my opinion, are just top tier, and there's not really been anything that I think has been better, really. And it's yeah, some of that stuff is just amazing.
Yeah, practical effects can only go so far, but with such a strong script and a strong tension built up through the entirety of the movie, it makes those scenes so impactful when you see them. It makes it easier to believe, and it's it's terrifying at times.
Yeah, I think that, even just from the opening shot of the movie, I've always enjoyed just you can tell the atmosphere from just the way it opens, and that's something I definitely enjoy too, rewatching it, is there's sort of this this ripple from the beginning to the end of the movie, is history repeating itself, with obviously it opens with the 2 people from the original outpost, and they're chasing this dog, and you don't know what's going on with that, and then by the end of the movie it all makes sense. And both the beginning and the end, they both have that haunting sort, even though it's over super simple. John Carpenter's great at that. He is able to make these amazing scores just super simple stuff, and it's just that bum 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 bum, and that's just that dread that builds up, and then it happens at the beginning of the movie, and then it happens at the very end of the movie, and it's like a nice bookend from beginning to end.
Yeah.
That's something that I'm always, while I don't think it's the best score that he's come up with, and there's probably more there's probably more movies that have more of an iconic score than that. I think that like that in particular is like super memorable and compelling. Even though something like Halloween technically has more of a memorable score, probably.
It also, starts with two people that have survived a previous attack, and it ends with two people, but you don't know if they've both survived the previous attack.
Yeah.
Yeah, the going back to the score, I would say functionally it has more of a similar usage as a movie like They Live, where the score in that, it's like even if you've seen They Live, whether you've seen it recently or you've seen it like years ago, you might not even remember how the score goes because it functions. I think of John Carpenter's said it's more like wallpaper, where you're supposed to forget that it's there. The score kind of has that feel too, even though a lot of the pieces by Ennio Morricone, the more orchestral stuff, also, it's interesting that he uses even those pieces in a similar way. But if you're into something more sort of that is still kind of wallpapery, but is supposed to grab you a bit more and is a bit more catchy, something like Escape from New York or Halloween would be in that ballpark. But I love the way he uses it in movies like this, where it just becomes almost part of the set, like wallpaper or something. Where it's we got to talk about the set design too and stuff. But that's what I was saying.
Yeah, I think kind of echoing off of that is like, you mentioned the set design, and I think, just from the beginning, you can just see they really did an amazing job, like making this feel like like an isolated place, like it actually exists, and like all around you is just something that can kill you. It's very, this movie and Alien are like really similar in a lot of ways. And I think that's one of those things is like, there's you're stuck with this thing that can kill you, and you don't understand it, and it could kill you, and you're just surrounded by nothing, and there's no way out and no way for anybody to help you. And that's like, I feel like that's a really interesting premise right there.
Yeah, the fact that there's like no guarantee at all of rescue is sort of what helps build the tension in this film, especially, as they kind of like destroy their own ways of escape in a sense.
Yeah, and I think that, Trevor, if you would like to say something about like I really enjoy sort of the, one of the biggest things about the movie that I think is enjoyable is like the slow descent that the characters have into distrust and sort of like the breaking down of their whole like trust in each other.
Yeah, because horror is a genre. This is true for movies in general, really, but horror especially, is that you have tropey, cliche characters are often the vehicle for this, but it's the descent as well, in the sense of, the characters keep getting in the worst situation, but it's usually because they keep making mistakes. And if you watch this movie, either the characters don't really make glaring mistakes that are infuriating, or if they do, there's some sort of justification for it where you can understand it. The writing in the movie goes a long way in making the characters likable or understandable. I've never known anyone who watched this where they were infuriated by any of the characters, which is a really crucial step in what makes the movie work. Is that if you're going to have a movie with 12 characters in an isolated location, make them count and don't have the audience be infuriated by them. And the pacing in conjunction with that, this isn't a super long movie, but it almost feels longer than it is, in a good way, where it's if the pacing were a little bit too fast, it would feel a little too like, well, why are the characters freaking out now? You know, the movie does such a good job, not only with the pacing, but the setting of making it feel like an oppressive setting where everything is so isolated and all the characters feel so tired and they don't want to have to deal with this thing. Even if it was just like a minor issue they were dealing with, they'd probably be reacting to a similar way of, now we got to deal with this. But the fact that it's this horrific extraterrestrial threat, which they take a while and even discovering that's what it is, it makes the movie a lot more powerful, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes the character dynamic so interesting is that they already kind of start out the film tired. You know, they are already kind of like their egos are kind of rubbing together and they're butting heads a little bit, and then like, you know, this thing happens and it just like exasperates those problems and like drives a farther wedge between all the characters.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned like the atmosphere. I think that's something the movie does really well, is like you can just feel when that there's something wrong like immediately, and you just know that like it's hiding in the shadows and it could be anybody. And I think that's something too. You mentioned the pacing. Like the pacing I think for this movie is like borderline perfect, where like, you know, it's real in the sense where it feels like there's stretches of time where nothing's happening, and then there's stretches of time where everything's happening, and that makes it feel like very visceral and very real, like how it would feel if these things were occurring. And yeah, that's something that you touched on too, is that it's already almost an atmosphere that could drive you crazy on its own. You know, like you're so far away from civilization, you're just around these same people for a set amount of time. Like you're already gonna have a problem just with that, and then to throw in this thing that happens, yeah, it's enough to drive everybody like over the edge. And of course, that I think they've really captured the real reactions that people would have and the sort of distrust. And that's something that I really enjoy about the movie, is that, you know, there's a lot of sort of whodunit type movies that come along, and the movie never tries to get too cute with it, where there's all these red herrings and like, oh, it's this person and now it's this person. They never try to like trick you too much, and that's something I really enjoy about it. Like the movie actually feels like it could be any one of them. It's never like overly trying to convince you that it's this person. It never goes too far with it. There's hints, there's sort of things that people do that could be considered suspicious, but it never goes too far in pushing you to one person or another, where it's like a gotcha moment where it's like, oh no, it's really this person. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think a lot of movies could learn from, because they sort of, well, it could be anybody, but it's really either this person or that person, you know. But this movie, it really does feel like it could be anybody.
I would say, in retrospect, the aspect of the movie that I admire most is its subtlety.
Yeah.
And that might sound weird if we're talking about a movie where people turn into these horrific monsters and gross things happen. But subtlety in that it has those moments, but the narrative, the pace, like how you were saying, where there's stretches where it feels like nothing's happening and feels like everything's happening, there's always something happening. And that's another thing, is that this movie is like, there's no fat on this movie, even though it feels very slow paced. The subtlety in the pacing, but also in the characterization, where every character has a distinct quirk. It doesn't feel like anyone's really just there because they have to be, in my opinion. And if you do feel that way, I encourage you to watch the movie a little bit closer. And I'm not saying, oh, you have to analyze it. It's really just a matter of paying attention to what the characters say, because there's all these little like quirks and all these little lines of dialogue and even mannerisms. Like you'll see them in the background, and the way they sit in a chair, and they're sort of like dozing off a certain way. It tells you so much more than an exasperating scene where they talk about, oh, I got a family back home and blah, blah. Information that's just there to serve as oh, don't you care about this character now? It's much more realistic, where it just feels like all of these people are just isolated to the point where every story they could have possibly swapped with each other has been told, and so they naturally are not super chatty with each other. And I think that's the ultimate sort of ironic, dramatic irony of the movie, is that each character wants to isolate themselves from each other, and that's only emphasized by the inciting incident and then the alien aspect of the movie, is they're trying to isolate themselves even more from each other. But even before that point, they kind of feel that they want to be distant from each other. And the irony is that once they have to be isolated as a group from others, from civilization, that's when the tensions grow. And that's sort of a microcosm of bigger societal issues, which you don't really get that level of subtlety and clever writing in a lot of horror movies. And I think that's really interesting.
That's something too you kind of mentioned that made me think of it. I also find it really like compelling that you don't really know a whole lot about these characters. The only stuff you really learn about them is like from the way they speak anyway. You only really learn about these characters from their reaction to the things that are happening. There's never like you said, there's not like some backstory here. It's just these are the characters, and you learn everything about the characters through the events that are shown. You know, that's really impressive when you think about it, because most movies they try to make you care about characters by telling you as much as possible about them, and this movie basically does the opposite.
Yeah.
Which I think is, you know, horror movies should try to do that. But yeah, and you know, moving on slightly, I also really like the sort of the look of this movie. Like, you know, I was rewatching it in preparation for this video, and I was watching the 4K that I have, and it's like it's still just an absolutely amazing looking movie.
It's beautiful.
Some of those shots of the landscape are just like, wow.
Yeah, and
you know, it looks like something that could come out today.
Yeah, it's very cinematic. It has that anamorphic look, and that kind of means like all the scenes at nighttime when you just see the lights, whether it's like a flare that somebody has or like the lights on the outpost, it has this like really cinematic look, and the use of color is really great. And that's something that, because it's great use of shadows throughout, but there's these little bits of color even on the characters and the costuming of each of them. They each kind of have their distinct like coloring, which helps you distinguish them. But the beauty of it is like when they go outside and they all have to wear their
parkas.
Their parkas. They all look identical, which was it was a deliberate decision to make them look identical there. But once they get inside, it's almost like this like theming of once they, because it's just driven forward. Like if you step outside, then you'll die within, you know, a very short amount of time. And if they stay inside, then it's easier for them to tell each other apart. And that's where their individual personalities and friction kind of drive them further apart.
Yeah, that's something too I was thinking about when I rewatched it, is that there's definitely a very interesting sort of like opposite that occurs at the beginning of the movie. It's very blue. It's very like, you know, it's very white out and everything. By the end of the movie, it's just everything's on fire and it's all red.
Yeah, and it's kind of like compounded by the scenes where they're using flares, and you get that blue and the red contrast from like the shadows and the light of the flare.
Yeah, it's a really big theme throughout the movie, is like this like contrast of
and
like the beginning to the end.
It all has that white, the outdoor shots where it's the different light sources, but there's always, even though the frame is dark outside of those light sources, there's always that bed of white snow underneath of it. It looks great, and Dean Cundy's like cinematography is just like, it's really stellar. And that's not even getting into how it even if you ignore how it's used in conjunction with the effects, like even just on its own, just like landscape shots and all that. It's a combination of everyone's efforts involved, but the cinematography is just like you said, very modern.
Yeah, my favorite bit is like the intro with like the helicopter scene. Just like the way that that's filmed is presented is just like, it's very stunning.
Yeah, I was definitely struck by that as well when I was rewatching it. Is just like, it just feels very it feels like something that could have come out recently and been right at home, and yeah. So I thought we'd move on a little bit, and I want to talk about specifically probably my favorite scene. Well, there's two scenes that really stick out to me as like when stuff finally starts happening and stuff's going down, is like just how incredible. So there's the kennel scene, which is the scene where the thing starts to take over, it starts attacking the dogs. Like that whole sequence I felt was just handled like so well, from the effects to the time to the shoot. Like everything just was like perfect with that scene. And it's like, so I'm still just kind of disgusted and horrified when I rewatch it. Like I still have a reaction to it, even though I've seen the movie like 20 times. Like it's still so good. And the practical effects are so awesome. And it just makes me sad that, that's never going to happen again for the most part. I mean, we get a few movies sprinkled here and there that do practical effects, you're The Void and Psycho Gorman and stuff, but really most movies have just abandoned it entirely.
Sort of
it's very sad.
Independently made like love letters to this kind of thing, but really in the mainstream it's sadly, long gone for the most part. I mean, acting like practical effects aren't used in major Hollywood productions, that's also just like false, but on the same scale, certainly not. But that's just it's more of a changing of the times, It's just understandable.
I really love it when they make like a full Predator costume and then just paint over it with CGI. That's my favorite.
Yeah. It's really great.
I also really love when, they did the prequel remake of this, where they just covered over all the practical effects with CGI, because they were like, it needs to look more modern.
Yeah.
Rather than it needs to look, I don't know, good.
Yeah, I feel like that kind of missed the point, is like, yes, that's something that I enjoy about this movie too, is like, yes, it did have a prequel, but I think they know, hopefully, not to like touch this movie ever with a sequel, because that would completely miss the point. Like, that would be
except for the game.
Yeah. But they've never tried to do a film as a sequel to it, and I'm very grateful for that. They've never really touched it in that way, and I feel like it's just a one-off thing, and it's great that it exists on its own.
Well, it helps when it doesn't make any money at the box office.
Yeah, that's something too. It is shocking to me that this, you have a movie like Halloween that is the way it is, and it's it did pretty well. Obviously, it got a million sequels, but this movie is, like, to me, far more impressive, and it basically didn't make any money. It made the budget back barely.
Thanks, E.T.
Yeah.
Well, people complain. People say E.T. is the reason for that. I think it's more of a. I think you could easily. There's a bunch of different reasons why you could say that. I think saying that it's E.T.'s fault is mostly just comedic, sarcastic conjecture.
Like what I did.
Yes, but it's. There's also people who've overanalyzed. They say, well, it was the way that people were in the early 80s. They wanted to go to the movie theaters for different reasons. It's like, sure. Or you could say, oh, the studio was not that confident in it, which I'm not sure if that's true. But it's also just, I mean, who cares what people thought of back then? Sure. It's always just like, it's just one of those things where the overall consensus of the quality of the movie is, don't listen blindly to what critics say, but it's the reception of it has certainly turned around, where I don't think there's, when people say this movie's underrated, they're really talking about what people thought of it 40 years ago. They're not talking about.
Yes, I agree. Don't listen to what critics say. Listen to what we say.
I just can't believe that critics at the time, couldn't stand it. Like, they thought it was just like a dumb, gory horror movie. They couldn't see like the clever writing, and
that actually does make sense to me. Not because they were right, but because the movie, because of the level of subtlety. I think that's the thing that's aged the best about the movie is its subtlety in the characterization, where if you're not paying attention, and the effects are so well done and they're so intense that if you just wanted to watch this as just like a mindless horror movie, then you'd probably be not paying attention to it, and the only thing that you remember is the effects, and you'd say, well, that was just a dumb movie. It was just a dumb excuse to watch some monsters. But if you actually watch it, there's way more under the hood, and I think that's...
Yeah, the monsters are just what stands out from our first viewing because it's so, like, breathtaking.
I definitely agree. It may... For me, I don't really remember what my reaction was watching it. I'm pretty sure... I was definitely positive, but I definitely think it is one of those movies where it isn't going to do... It's probably going to actually do more for you on your, like, third or fourth viewing than it does on your first, because there's just so many things that you like start to pick up on and you start to notice, and like it's one of the most fun movies I think to rewatch. Like I'm pretty much always down to rewatch it. I watched it last night, and I'd watch it again right now.
Yes,
it's that good.
Well, let's do that. Let's turn the video off and go watch The Thing.
Yes, and that's what everybody should do right now.
Indeed.
Assuming that
minus the turn the video off part.
Assuming that you've already watched it, which you should have. This is rewatching specifically.
Yeah, it is. It is one of the most rewatchable movies, in my opinion. And yeah, like just from the kennel scene to I'll call it the defibrillation scene.
Oh yeah.
I just love how it kind of plays with your expectations in that moment of like, it's just, you think one thing's happening and then it turns out to be something completely different. And that's something that also really stuck out to me in the repeat viewing was like all the pyrotechnics and stuff. Like it's all real. They actually use all these flamethrowers indoors, which is like pretty insane. And there's one scene in particular that stuck out to me, which was one of the scenes where one of the characters, is getting taken over by the thing, and he's, runs outside, and McCready just like blows him up with dynamite, and like it's very clear that that's a real person. Like their stuntman is like right there, and fire's just like raining down from the sky, and I'm like, very impressive. Yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of the movie on the rewatch because there's so much fire and there's so many explosions in the movie that are like very visceral and real.
Yeah, and it's cool because in The Thing from Another World, at the end of the movie, they light the thing on fire, and it was actually the first like controlled burn like that where they set an actor in a costume on fire. It's like, it's cool to see that like echoed through in this remake essentially of it. Reimagining, I guess.
Which is also ultimately ironic because when they were filming all the indoor stuff, they had to lower the temperature inside to make it authentically cool, while in reality, outside where they were filming, temperatures were like through the roof, like over 100 degrees. So that's sort of interesting. In fact, I believe there's one matte shot when they go to the alien saucer site where they uncover it, and where the block of ice is there's this wide shot where they're walking up to it. There's a hole in the ground. It's composite or matte. If you look up the behind the scenes of it, they were just in the middle of like grassy field, and they just had like this white strip of fake snow that they walked on, and they were still in parkas and stuff. So I'm sure that was fun to shoot.
Nice.
Yeah. That kind of brings me to sort of what is probably technically the best scene in the movie, which is sort of I'll call it the interrogation / blood test scene.
Yeah, blood test scene.
And first of all, like the idea for it is like really clever, and I also enjoyed the amount of tension and dread that is built up throughout the scene with taking all the people's blood, and they're obviously testing it to see who has been taken over by the thing and who hasn't. And I just felt the whole scene was just an absolute case study in like dread and suspense, and just the character interactions I just really thought were really enjoyable. And yeah, it honestly is one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
It's a scene where every facet of the movie that's done well, which is to say every facet of the movie, is on full display, because because it's punctuated by a big gross out monster sequence at the end, but up to that, it's about the tension. It's about the fact that the writing's clever enough to where it feels like the character could figure out and deduce this idea that they can conduct this blood test in this way and that it would work. That makes sense, and the tension between the characters of who they each personally distrust and think is has been assimilated or whatever up to that point is really well done, and it's shot great. It's everything that's great about the movie is on full display, most obviously during a scene like that.
Yeah, like throughout the movie you follow McCready as like the main character, but like there's a lot of great scenes where they kind of dismantle your trust in him, and this is one of those scenes because he's established to have murdered an innocent man. Well, innocent, he was trying to kill him, but it's like he killed a person who was not the Thing, which makes the audience not trust him, as well as everybody that he has tied to the couch not trust him, even though we, the audience, are following him thinking like, oh, he must be the protagonist, but, you know, it puts that doubt in your mind that you don't know who is who.
That's something that stuck out to me, too, rewatching it, is that while, yes, you could say that, you know, it was, you know, wrong or it was a murder or whatever for him to shoot that person, I think it's also a little bit more justified when you realize that the scene before it, they're perfectly willing to let him freeze to death outside, even if he's not the Thing. Mm-hmm. You know, they straight up say it's like, well, I guess that if not, too bad, pretty much.
Fucking way she goes.
And so I think it's really good when you consider that it's like, you know, everybody is perfectly willing to more or less like sacrifice the other people as long as, you know, the greater good of like not allowing this alien to make it to humanity, which would, you know, destroy the planet pretty much.
It's a great kind of thematic through line of the movie is the bending and stretching of societal conventions of what's okay and what's not in the face of sudden horrific paranoia. It's not that's sort of the ultimate horror of the movie, and everything else like the monster stuff that's really just to ramp up the same idea. It's really just to put a bow on it. That's the real kind of thing that sticks with you for me personally after the movie is the way it makes you think about people differently, even though this situation's never going to happen to you, but it's about the idea of what could happen hypothetically if push comes to shove, and where does everyone's line get drawn. It's a very poignant sort of exploration of that idea, and subtly done too.
Yeah, and I think that's something too. You mentioned the Thing or the alien not being sort of the focus. I really enjoy that too. Is that like for a lot of horror movies, you know, they have something that is the draw and the focus, and maybe that's something that people were put off by back then. Is that, hey, this is a movie about an alien, but it's not like over the top. Well, I guess parts of it are over the top, but it's not the alien is almost not even the focus. It doesn't really. It never explains like it never over explains about what the threat is really. The terror comes from not understanding anything about what's happening. There's no reason. There's no sort of there's nothing driving this alien to do what it's doing. It's just doing things, and you don't know what those things are doing. And there's hints. Obviously, there's stuff that happens near the end that hints at what it's trying to do, but it's never. It's survival, and I think the movie does really well with not like over explaining anything about what you're seeing.
Yeah, a creative decision I think that was a wise one was their decision like to change the creature's design every time it's on screen, because if you read the book or the short story, I guess, that is based off of, the Thing has like a base form, which is like, if they had done that in the movie, it would kind of ruin a lot of the terror and suspense of it, because like the terror comes from not knowing what this thing is going to look like when it pops out of somebody, you know.
Yeah.
That's part of the terror, at least.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I would say it is one of those things where you hear the concept of the movie and you think it's going to be about one thing, and I think it ends up just basically being a like case study in, you know, humanity, I guess.
And I think a big source of the appeal, where especially if you've had this movie spoiled for you and you haven't actually sat down and watched it, or you know everything about it before you've seen it and you sit down and watch it and are underwhelmed, or you saw that newer movie before you saw the original. There's a billion different things, but an important part of what makes the movie so great is the fact that you know so little at first and that you learn so much with the characters. When the movie starts, you have no idea who these Norwegians are, or like you don't know who they are or why they're attacking this dog. Except for the one thing that I kind of wish was not in the movie, which is the opening spaceship shot, which I've heard that was a studio decision, but I can't confirm that. I think I might be confusing that, but I mean, it looks cool, and the shot of Earth is cool, and of course the title, which is ripped straight out of the 50s one, is great, but the idea of putting that there, I think, is a bit sort of kind of deflates that a little bit, but it's so early on in the movie that I think it's forgivable.
That's one of those things. I forget that is even in the movie.
Yeah.
Exactly.
For some reason, when I watch it, I forget that that's even there. I always assume that it just opens with like, you know,
with the dog scene.
Yeah. That's you know what I assumed and expected it to be.
Kind of like Predator. You just forget about the spaceship scene at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because it kind of deflates the tension a little bit.
A little bit, and I assume it's a studio note because it sounds like it, but I was trying to listen for that. When I rewatched this movie, I listened to the commentary track. Which, side note, if you are at all interested in stuff like that, and if you're already a big fan of this movie and John Carpenter's work, I recommend listening to the commentary tracks for this movie, Escape from New York, and Big Trouble in Little China, because they're all gold. It's John Carpenter and Kurt Russell talking over them, and they're really interesting but also very charming. But anyway, the pacing of the movie works so well because you learn along with the characters, and the unknown extends to basically until the very last moments of the movie and after it's over of what you don't know. That's the most important part of it all. And like when they're exploring the base and you don't see any of the horror, you just see the aftermath, and you don't know what caused it. You don't know why there's this big block of ice. You don't know why there looks like there was an attack. You don't know any of these things. And then once you learn, it slowly starts to make sense, but nothing's ever totally sensible so that you feel, okay, I understand everything. There's always that little sort of nagging voice. And again, it's also subtly and carefully done. It feels very modern and competent.
Yeah, and not to get into any fan theories, but I also really enjoy that too, is that like you can endlessly speculate about what happens when to who. Like there's just so much open-endedness in the things that you don't see. Is like it really is kind of, the possibilities are endless in what the actual events of the movie that you don't see, what occurs. And I think that's really compelling too. And speaking briefly on some of the performances, like obviously Kurt Russell is like the main character, and it's incredible. And everybody I think does a great job with the performances, but and maybe it was just like knowing about Keith David before, but I think he still stands out as like pretty top tier for how little he's actually in the movie.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's one of the standout characters for sure.
Yeah, and that's something that struck me too rewatching it, is that he's really not on screen for very long, but he's still like somehow really memorable.
Mm-hmm. He's like the most threatening presence to MacReady outside of the thing itself, because he's, you know, challenging his authority and generally like just butting heads with him. It's like I think that's what makes him so memorable.
Well, up until the point when Wilford Brimley destroys everything.
Oh yeah,
You wanted to be us, which is also a great scene.
Yeah.
And there's no alien involved there. It's just the sort of, it's almost the first boiling point. I can't remember. I believe it's after the dog attack. So other than that, it's the first biggest boiling point up to that movie. That's when they're officially stuck, and it's great because you don't know. It makes sense because I've always, if he was just a human and he wasn't a thing, it makes sense because he doesn't want it to escape, and he doesn't want him to call for help if it's the thing. And there's always some sort of explanation that you can come up with that the movie provides without outright stating anything, which is really great.
Wilford Brimley's role in this movie is honestly one of my favorites. Like, the character of Blair is just very interesting, being like a scientist and being the one that like discovers the thing, and then he destroys their way of getting out of the outpost essentially, and because of that they like quarantine him and lock him away. And then there's like that scene where they're like looking through like the sliding thing in the door, and he has like a noose in there, and it's never like explained.
It's really
it's like, did he kill himself and become infected with the thing? Was he planning to kill himself? Like, why did he have the noose in there?
It's a very amusing shot, and it's there's a lot of sort of not I wouldn't call it comedy relief, but just like levity in the movie that's very, again, subtle is like the word of the day. Because this is a movie where it pays to pay attention. Who would have thought when you're watching it? I think that's another reason why people at the time, they just wanted to watch a monster movie. And even audiences today, like if you're not into older movies and stuff, and someone just tells you to watch this and you're underwhelmed, I can see if you're just sort of half paying attention and you're just waiting for the big explosive thing to happen. Where little touches of levity, and there's a lot of memorable lines, but there's not a whole lot of cheesiness in the movie. Everyone's sort of understated, as they should be, because of the tone and setting established. It makes sense that there's not a whole lot of goofy one-liners to go around for the most part.
Yeah, like my favorite example of something like that is at the end of the blood test scene, when Gary screams, it's like something about, I don't want to be tied to this fucking couch. Yeah. It's like, it's an understandable reaction, but like it's kind of funny.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. Something that I was thinking about when you were talking earlier, Trevor, is about like spoiling this movie. And it's one of those things where like, even if you know the premise and you know the beginning and the end, I feel like it's still not really spoiled for you, because it's not even really about how it's going to end, I would say. That's almost like secondary. It's more about what is going to occur when to who. And that's where I don't think it's really, unless somebody literally sits down and explains to you like the order of things and when this happens and who it happens to, I don't think it's really possible to spoil this movie, because most of the enjoyment is not going to come from like how it ends, in my opinion. Even though I do thoroughly enjoy the ending, it's more about the scenes that occur in between. And
it's the journey, not the destination of the story.
Yeah, it's a pretty it's almost it's almost secondary. Yeah, how the movie ends is like secondary to how you enjoy what comes before it.
It's a work of art that's, you have to look back at the greater part of it, where as all good, it doesn't have to, not just horror movies, it's more how they stick with you in a haunting way over time, but it's also any movie that makes an impact on you. If it sticks with you longer, I think that's generally a good sign of the quality of it and the thought and effort that went into it. And I think there's so many aspects of this movie that kind of go not unpraised, but go unnoticed by a lot of viewers, especially because the effects are so legendary and everyone is quick to talk about those. And as great as they are, they do almost in a meta way maybe detract if someone is like, oh, that's that movie that's supposed to have cool monster stuff in it, but there's a lot more to it. Even though the monster stuff's great and all, it's a work of art that I think is worthy of analysis and rewatch and appraisal.
I think that's a really good way to close it out. I mean, does anybody else have anything to add? I don't really have anything else to add.
Yeah, the 2011 The Thing was not that bad. You are both bitches.
I mean,
that's all I have to say.
I mean,
that's another
it
video.
was, but it was.
Well, so it tried to exist. So maybe not to say.
I'm not even
and
sure.
nothing should try to exist. You're
Yeah.
exactly right.
Especially a prequel that explains everything that happened in this movie and kind of deflates all the tension of it if you watch it first.
Okay, but would you have rather them make a remake of The Thing, which is what they wanted to do?
That's basically what it is. It's just they use the excuse of a prequel to have all the same things happen.
I think it's not that bad.
I personally think it's not very enjoyable at all.
I mean, does it
It
have...
doesn't have practical effects, so it's bad.
It doesn't have... No, it does not have the same interesting character depth because they decided to make half the characters not be able to talk to the other half of the characters. But still not terrible. I recommend it. Don't listen to these two jackoffs.
I don't.
I don't either. I will personally say that, yes, the whole not having practical effects in that movie is... It's the point that everyone uses, but I also would personally say that I don't think the movie is particularly good otherwise. But that's just my opinion.
But anyway, yeah, John Carpenter's The Thing. It's good.
It's a masterpiece.
Watch it. And we're definitely looking forward to bringing you the rest of the videos in the month of October. So thanks for watching.